The Hidden Room. Chapter 1. The Discovery. It was a stormy afternoon when Evelyn Hartman arrived at the sprawling, decaying mansion nestled deep in the Connecticut woods. A renowned art restorer, Evelyn had been commissioned to catalog and restore a collection of forgotten masterpieces, supposedly hidden within the walls of the Weatherlys estate. The mansion, once a grand symbol of wealth and prestige, now loomed like a shadowed specter under the heavy clouds. As Evelyn pushed open the massive front doors, the air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and neglect. The grand foyer, lined with cracked marble and tarnished gold, hinted at the opulence that once graced these halls. But something felt off, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover its long-buried secrets. Evelyn spent the first few hours surveying the house, noting the extent of the damage and the amount of work that would be needed. As she moved through the mansion, she felt a growing unease. The walls seemed to whisper, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a distant footstep. The old portraits hanging in the hallway stared down at her, their eyes following her every move. But it was in the east wing, where the air felt the thickest, that Evelyn stumbled upon something unusual. A small, intricately carved wooden door, hidden behind a tapestry that had been left to rot. The door was almost too small to be of any practical use, and its lock was coated in a thick layer of dust, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. Her curiosity piqued. Evelyn reached into her bag for a set of small tools she always carried with her. As she worked the lock, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic, wafted up from the black void. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn flicked on her flashlight and stepped cautiously down the stairs. The walls of the staircase were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, depicting scenes of idyllic countryside, now faded and stained with time. The steps groaned under her weight, threatening to collapse with every move. At the bottom of the stairs, Evelyn found herself in a small, dusty room. The air was thick and still, as if it had been undisturbed for years. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, artifacts, and old family relics, all covered in a thick layer of dust. But it was the large, ornate painting at the center of the room that caught her eye. It depicted a family, a man, a woman, and two young children, standing in front of the very mansion she now stood in. The family in the painting seemed almost alive, their eyes dark and piercing. But there was something else, a figure barely visible standing in the shadows behind them. Evelyn moved closer, her heart pounding in her chest. As she examined the painting, she noticed a small, nearly invisible latch on the frame. Without thinking, she reached out and pulled it. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed through the room as a hidden panel in the wall slowly slid open, revealing another room beyond. This one was smaller, more intimate, and filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. But what truly caught Evelyn's attention was the bed in the center of the room. Lying on it, perfectly preserved, was the lifeless body of a young woman, her face as serene as if she were merely sleeping. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as the implications of her discovery began to sink in. The hidden room, the preserved body, this was no ordinary abandoned mansion. Whatever had happened here, it was something dark, something that had been hidden away for decades. And now she had opened the door to it all. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. Evelyn's hands trembled as she stepped closer to the bed, her flashlight beam flickering over the young woman's still features. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder outside. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, her pale skin almost luminescent in the dim light. Her clothes were old-fashioned from a bygone era, and a delicate locket rested against her chest. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, Evelyn reached out and touched the locket. It was cold, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been locked away from the warmth of the world for far too long. She carefully opened it, revealing a tiny photograph of a man who bore a striking resemblance to the one in the painting upstairs. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? How had she ended up here, preserved as if time had no hold on her? And more importantly, why was she hidden away in this secret room? The longer Evelyn stared at the woman's serene face, the more she felt a strange connection, as if she were being drawn into the mystery that surrounded this mansion. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from upstairs, shattering the stillness of the moment. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat. She was supposed to be alone in the mansion. No one else was scheduled to arrive for days. Panic gripped her as she turned off her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. For a few agonizing moments, she stood frozen, listening to the silence that followed. Then she heard it again, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving slowly through the halls above. The sound grew louder, closer, as if whoever was upstairs was searching for something, or someone. Evelyn's mind raced as she debated her next move. Should she confront the intruder? Or try to escape? But the thought of leaving the mansion, of abandoning the mystery she had just uncovered, felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for as a restorer and historian. She decided to take the risk. Gathering her courage, she crept back up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaking boards that might give her away. The door at the top of the stairs was slightly ajar, and through the crack she could see the dimly lit hallway. The footsteps had stopped, but she could feel a presence nearby, something dark and oppressive. Evelyn slowly pushed the door open, peering out into the corridor. The grand hall was empty, but the air was thick with tension. As she stepped out, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. The painting of the family had changed. The shadowy figure in the background was gone, leaving the family to stand alone in the foreground. A cold dread settled over her as she realized what it meant. The shadowy figure, whoever or whatever it had been, was now out of the painting, free to roam the halls of the mansion. And Evelyn knew deep down that it was connected to the young woman in the hidden room, that it had something to do with the tragic events that had taken place here so many years ago. As she stood there trying to piece together the puzzle, she heard a whisper, a soft, eerie voice that seemed to come from all around her. "Help me find me." The words echoed in her mind, filling her with an overwhelming sense of urgency. Without thinking, she turned and ran back to the hidden room, her footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise silent mansion. But when she reached the bottom of the stairs and flung open the door, the bed was empty. The young woman was gone. Chapter 3. The letter. Evelyn's breath caught as she stared at the empty bed. The room, once oppressive in its stillness, now felt like a void, as if whatever had been keeping the secrets of the mansion hidden had been released. The young woman's disappearance wasn't just an illusion. Something or someone had taken her. And it had happened in the moments since Evelyn had left the room. Desperate for answers, Evelyn scanned the room for any clue, any sign of where the woman might have gone. Her eyes settled on the locket, now lying open on the bed, glinting in the beam of her flashlight. She reached for it, her fingers trembling, and as she did, something caught her eye, a piece of yellowed paper tucked beneath the pillow. With a sense of foreboding, Evelyn pulled out the paper, her heart pounding as she unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate, elegant, and unmistakably old. It was a letter addressed to someone named Eliza. "My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then the worst has come to pass and I am no longer among the living. But know that I loved you, my sweet sister, more than words could ever convey. You must leave this place immediately before he finds you. The darkness that has taken hold of our family will stop at nothing to consume us all. There is a room beneath the east wing hidden from prying eyes. You must never enter it, for that is where his power is strongest. Burn this letter after reading and flee to safety. Do not look back. With all my love, Annabelle." The letter ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted before she could finish. Evelyn's pulse raced as she pieced together the implications. Annabelle must have been the woman on the bed, and Eliza her sister. But who was the he mentioned in the letter? And what had he done to this family? Evelyn's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden feeling of cold air rushing through the room. She looked up, her flashlight casting erratic beams of light as she scanned the walls. The hidden room was silent, but the air was charged with something sinister, something that hadn't been there before. Then she noticed it, a faint outline on the wall opposite the bed, barely visible in the dim light. It looked like another door, but this one was different. It wasn't hidden or sealed away, but rather, it seemed to be a passage that had been forgotten, like the house itself had tried to bury it. She approached the door, her every instinct screaming at her to turn back, to heed Annabelle's warning. But something compelled her forward, a force stronger than fear, stronger than reason. Evelyn placed her hand on the cold wood, and with a hesitant push, the door creaked open. A narrow corridor stretched out before her, lined with faded wallpaper and ancient portraits. The air grew colder with each step she took, and the sense of being watched intensified. At the end of the corridor, she could see a faint light, flickering like a dying flame. As she reached the end, Evelyn found herself in a small, circular room. The walls were lined with old books, their spines cracked and faded. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair, facing a large mirror that dominated the opposite wall. The mirror's glass was tarnished, its surface clouded as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. But what drew Evelyn's attention was not the mirror itself, but what was reflected in it. Standing behind her, in the doorway she had just entered, was a tall, shadowy figure. Its features were obscured, but its presence was undeniable, a dark silhouette against the dim light of the corridor. Evelyn spun around, her heart hammering in her chest, but the doorway was empty. The figure had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She turned back to the mirror, her pulse racing, and saw something that made her blood run cold. Written across the mirror's surface, in the same elegant handwriting as the letter, were the words, "You should have left when you had the chance." The message sent a shiver down her spine. Whoever, or whatever, had written it was aware of her presence, aware that she had defied the warnings in Annabelle's letter. And now there was no turning back. Evelyn's hand instinctively tightened around the locket. She had stumbled into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. A mystery that was no longer confined to the past but was very much alive, and watching her every move. With no other choice, Evelyn turned back to the corridor, the mirror's message burned into her mind. She had to find out the truth, not just about the woman in the hidden room, but about the darkness that had consumed the Weatherly family, and was now closing in on her. Chapter 4. The Portrait. Evelyn retraced her steps through the narrow corridor, the walls seeming to close in around her. The cold air clung to her skin like a shroud, and the oppressive silence only heightened her sense of dread. Every instinct urged her to flee the mansion, to escape the dark force that had claimed it, but the unanswered questions gnawed at her. She couldn't leave, not until she understood the full extent of what had happened here. As she emerged from the hidden passage, the grand hallway felt different. The atmosphere was heavier, more menacing. The portraits lining the walls appeared altered, their colors muted and their expressions more sinister. The eyes of the painted figures seemed to follow her, their gazes filled with a knowing malice that hadn't been there before. Her flashlight beam wavered as she swept it across the hallway, landing on the portrait of the Weatherly family. To her horror, the figures in the painting had shifted. The man and woman who had once stood proudly in the foreground were now positioned off to the side, their faces twisted in fear. The two children were no longer smiling, they appeared distressed, their small hands clutching each other as if seeking comfort. And in the center of the painting, where the shadowy figure had once lurked in the background, stood a man. His features were now clear, a tall, imposing figure with dark, hollow eyes and an unsettling smile. He held an air of authority, of someone who had claimed ownership not just of the house, but of the souls within it. Evelyn's breath hitched as she realized that the man in the portrait was the same one whose photograph she had seen in the locket. The same man Annabelle had warned Eliza about in the letter. The realization sent a chill through her. This man, whoever he was, had been at the heart of the darkness that plagued the Weatherly family. Determined to find more clues, Evelyn approached the portrait. As she got closer, she noticed something strange, an inscription at the bottom of the frame that she hadn't seen before. The words were faint, almost as if they had been deliberately obscured, but with effort she made them out. "He who enters this house enters his domain. Beware the master of the hidden room." The cryptic warning only deepened the mystery. Who was this master, and what had he done to the Weatherly family? And more importantly, what did he want with Evelyn? She knew she needed answers, and the key to those answers lay in understanding the family's tragic history. Turning away from the portrait, Evelyn made her way to the mansion's library, hoping to find any records or diaries that might shed light on the events that had taken place here. The library was vast, filled with dusty shelves and old, crumbling books. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and leather, and the dim light cast eerie shadows across the room. Evelyn began her search, pulling out volumes and flipping through their pages, but most of the books were irrelevant. Histories, novels, and records of mundane family affairs. Then, tucked away on a high shelf, she found a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the initials AW. She opened it carefully, the brittle pages crackling under her fingers. The handwriting inside was neat and precise. Annabelle's, she realized. This was her personal diary. Evelyn's heart raced as she skimmed through the entries. They started out innocuously enough. Accounts of daily life, notes on visitors, descriptions of social events. But as she read further, the tone changed. The entries became darker, more frantic. July 12, 1897. I fear for our safety. My husband has grown distant, secretive. He spends hours in that hidden room, conducting rituals. He claims it is for the good of the family, but I can see the madness in his eyes. He speaks of powers, of a force that will grant us immortality, but at what cost? August 4, 1897. The children have begun to complain of nightmares. They say they see a shadowy figure in their room at night, watching them. I am terrified that whatever evil my husband has summoned is now loose in this house. I must protect them, but I am powerless against it. September 21, 1897. It is too late. The darkness has claimed him. My husband is no longer the man I once knew. He has become something else, something monstrous. He has locked Eliza and the children in the hidden room, promising that it will keep them safe. But I know the truth. He intends to use them in his final ritual. I must stop him, but I fear I am too late. The entries ended abruptly with no further explanation. But the implications were clear. Annabelle's husband had been consumed by some dark power, and in his madness, he had sacrificed his own family in a twisted attempt to achieve immortality. Evelyn's hands shook as she closed the diary. The weight of the mansion's history pressed down on her, the realization that she was now entangled in the same dark forces that had destroyed the Weatherlys. And somewhere in this house, that dark power still lingered, waiting for its next victim. As she stood in the quiet of the library, Evelyn knew she had to find the hidden room again, the place where it had all begun. She had to confront whatever was lurking there before it was too late. But deep down, she feared that the darkness was already closing in, and that there would be no escape. Chapter 5. The Final Ritual. The mansion seemed to pulse with a life of its own as Evelyn made her way back to the east wing. The walls, once merely decayed and crumbling, now felt as if they were breathing, expanding and contracting in rhythm with her own rapid heartbeat. The sense of dread that had been growing within her since she first stepped foot in the Weatherly estate now gripped her entirely. But she couldn't turn back. She was too deep in this now, and the only way out was through. Evelyn reached the hidden staircase, her hands trembling as she touched the cold wood of the door. She hesitated, the memory of the shadowy figure in the mirror flashing through her mind. Whatever was waiting for her down there was more than just a ghost of the past. It was something ancient and malevolent, a force that had claimed the lives and souls of the Weatherly family, and it was waiting for her. Summoning every ounce of courage, Evelyn pushed the door open and descended the stairs once more. The walls of the narrow staircase seemed to close in around her, the dampness seeping into her bones. She kept the flashlight steady, its beams slicing through the thick darkness ahead. When she reached the bottom, the hidden room looked just as it had before, but there was something different in the air. It felt heavier, almost electric, as if the room itself was charged with the energy of whatever dark force resided here. Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the bed in the center of the room. The covers had been disturbed, the sheets pulled back as if someone, or something, had recently risen from it. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. The young woman, Annabelle, had not just disappeared, she had been taken. Her gaze shifted to the far wall, where the hidden door she had discovered earlier now stood wide open, revealing the corridor beyond. The light at the end of the passage flickered, beckoning her forward. Evelyn knew that this was where she needed to go. Whatever had happened in this house, whatever had consumed the Weatherly family, the answers lay at the end of that corridor. With her heart pounding in her chest, Evelyn stepped through the door and into the corridor. The walls were lined with old, faded portraits, images of the Weatherly family throughout the generations. But the further she walked, the more distorted the faces became. Smiles turned to grimaces, eyes darkened, and features twisted into grotesque shapes, as if the darkness that had consumed this family was seeping into their very images. At the end of the corridor, Evelyn found herself in a large, circular chamber. The walls were lined with tall, flickering candles, their flames casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. In the center of the chamber was a large, stone altar, stained dark with age. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and something else, something metallic and sharp like blood. On the altar, Evelyn saw a book, its pages yellowed with age and covered in strange symbols. The book radiated a dark energy, its presence almost palpable. This was the source of the power that had claimed the mansion, the key to the ritual that had consumed the Weatherly family. As she approached the altar, Evelyn felt a cold wind whip through the chamber, extinguishing several of the candles and plunging parts of the room into shadow. She hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but something stronger pulled her forward. She reached out and opened the book, the pages crackling under her touch. The text inside was written in an ancient language, but the symbols seemed to burn into her mind, filling her with an understanding that was not her own. She saw visions, glimpses of the past. Annabelle's husband, William Weatherly, standing at this very altar, chanting in a language long forgotten. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, and Evelyn could almost hear the echo of his voice, summoning something dark and terrible from beyond. The ritual had been meant to grant him immortality, to bind his soul to the mansion and its grounds. But something had gone wrong. The darkness he had called forth had consumed him, twisted his spirit into something monstrous. And now that dark force was bound to this place, feeding on the souls of those who dared to enter. As the vision faded, Evelyn felt a presence behind her, a cold, oppressive weight pressing down on her shoulders. She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest, and saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was William Weatherly, or what remained of him. His form was shrouded in darkness, his eyes hollow and devoid of life. He moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps, his gaze fixed on the book in her hands. Evelyn's mind raced as she realized the truth. The ritual had bound William's spirit to the mansion, but it had also trapped the souls of his family, and now it sought to claim hers. She was the final piece, the final sacrifice needed to complete the ritual and grant William the immortality he had sought. But Evelyn was not going to let that happen. With a surge of determination, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial of holy water, something she had brought with her more out of superstition than belief. Now it felt like her only hope. She uncorked the vial and splashed the water onto the altar, the liquid sizzling as it made contact with the stone. A scream echoed through the chamber, not from William, but from the walls themselves, as if the mansion was crying out in pain. The dark energy in the room recoiled, and the figure of William Weatherly flickered, his form distorting and fading. Evelyn seized the moment, tearing a page from the book and setting it alight with one of the candles. The flames quickly consumed the old paper, the symbols burning away in a brilliant flash of light. The chamber shook, the walls cracking as the dark energy within the mansion was released. William let out a final anguished cry as his form disintegrated into the shadows, the last remnants of his soul torn from the mansion. The candles flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness, but the oppressive weight that had filled the air was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the dark, the silence of the mansion now deafening. The ritual had been broken, the dark force banished, but the cost had been great. The Weatherly family was gone, their souls finally freed from the curse that had bound them to this place. As she made her way back through the mansion, Evelyn felt the air grow lighter, the oppressive darkness lifting with each step she took. The walls no longer whispered, and the eyes in the portraits no longer followed her. The mansion, once a tomb of dark secrets, was now just an old, empty house. Evelyn stepped out into the cold night air, the storm that had raged earlier now reduced to a gentle drizzle. She looked back at the mansion, its silhouette no longer looming with the threat of unseen terrors, but standing silent and still, as if it too had finally found peace. She knew she would never forget what had happened here, the darkness that had nearly claimed her. But she had survived, and with that survival came the knowledge that she had freed the Weatherly family from their torment. The mansion would be restored, but its dark history would remain hidden, a secret known only to her. As Evelyn walked away, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds, casting the mansion in a soft, golden glow. The hidden room was no longer a place of fear, but a reminder of the power of the past, and the courage it took to face it. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment on what you thought of the story.